Great. Thanks everyone for being here today for our webinar on NorthWestern Energy's rate case. We have with us a couple of our experts from this rate case, as well as some folks from RMI that have recently done a study that is very relevant to this rate case. We'll dive into the details here in a moment, but just a high-level overview. NorthWestern Energy has requested at the Public Service Commission to increase electricity rates for a number of reasons. Included there is about a 26% increase to electric base rates for residential customers, and that has cost recovery for the newly built Yellowstone County Generating Station methane plant over in Laurel, as well as some provisions for investments at the Colstrip coal plant. With us today, we have Amanda Levin, the Director of Policy Analysis and Science Office at the Natural Resource Defense Council, NRDC, Michael Goggin, Vice President of Grid Strategies. Those are both some of our experts in the rate case. And then with RMI, we have Becky Lee and Christian Fong. I would note that given MEIC's status as a intervener in the rate case, as well as some of the joint interveners that you see on the screen, we have limitations in how we can engage with the public, but we can inform all of y'all on what's going on to make sure you're all in the loop. If you have any further things that you want to learn about this process, I believe we might have some folks from Northern Plains Resource Council on the call that you can definitely reach out to and learn more about that. But with that, I think we can kick it off with our first speaker. It's going to be Amanda Levin. Amanda oversees the development of modeling, analyses, and materials for NRDC's advocacy on climate and clean energy priorities at the state, local, and federal levels. Her work has focused on deep decarbonization modeling, energy policy analysis of both legislative and regulatory action, wholesale and retail energy market design, oil and gas markets, and utility regulatory and rate-making issues. She previously served as the technical lead for NRDC's Eastern Energy team, overseeing the development of modeling, analyses, and materials for NRDC's advocacy in the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast. I'll hand it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you to MEIC, the Human Resource Council, and Northwest Energy Coalition for hosting this webinar. And thank you all for just taking the time to join and listen in. I first wanted to start with some broader background on the full testimony that we submitted in this docket. So next slide. And apologies if this is quite a bit of text, but I will talk through it all. For the joint parties, we submitted 5 pieces of direct testimony from 5 different witnesses. That includes Michael Goggin, who will present more on his testimony and findings after me, but focused mainly on the company's selection and issues with the company's selection of the Yellowstone County Generating Station, YCGS, and the company's proposed Reliability Compliance Balancing Account, or RCBA, which would allow the company to recover and receive annual recovery of all incremental costs, including both capital and operational costs necessary for its coal plant, Colstrip, to comply with upcoming environmental regulations. The second witness for the joint parties in our direct testimony was Ron Binns, who focused chiefly on Colstrip issues and its risks today and out into the future, discussing the significant potential costs that the company may incur and pass on to customers due to policy and macroeconomic forces affecting the facility, and recommended that the RCBA, that Reliability Compliance Balancing Account, be rejected, and called on the Commission to require Northwest Energy to consider earlier closure dates in its upcoming future planning processes. Elsie Hodling reviewed the company's modeling of the Yellowstone County Generating Station and analyzed alternative portfolios to that facility that were available at the time of the selection and could have provided the same capacity at lower cost to meet customer needs. Her modeling served as the basis for recommendations on how to cap cost recovery for Yellowstone County Generating Station in this rate case, and served as the basis for some of our recommendations in both Ron and Michael's testimony. Roger Colton, who had been testifying on low-income issues for over 40 years, provided our testimony on energy affordability issues in NorthWestern's territory, both under their current electricity rates in effect today, as well as under the company's proposed rates in this proceeding. He found that NorthWest Energy's current discount rate program for low-income households only marginally improved bill affordability, and that many of the qualifying households did not participate in the programs today. He set forth 4 recommendations to modify and increase participation in the existing discount program and supplement these existing programs with additional targeted bill assistance and efficiency funding for these low-income households. And lastly, Nick on the call and our MC focused on NorthWest Energy's failure to account for the risks of climate change in its operation and investment decisions, and commented and recommended that the company's proposed ROE not be approved and that they not receive an ROE above their previous currently approved ROE of a 9.65% return on equity. So those were what we submitted back in January as part of our initial direct testimony. I then served as the sole cross-answering witness for the joint parties. Next slide. Where instead of kind of responding to the company's initial filing, I focused on the recommendations and the testimony from different intervening parties that were submitted in January and forward 5 additional recommendations on behalf of the joint parties. The first is to kind of building on the work that Michael Goggin, Chelsea Hoteling, and Ron Binns did in our direct testimony, emphasize that the commission should reduce the amount of money the utility can recover from customers for its new Yellowstone County Generating Gas Station. At a minimum, based on the testimony filed by a number of parties, we recommend that the commission should disallow cost recovery for all cost overruns, litigation, and delays that were incurred during the construction of this gas plant. The second, building on and supporting the testimonies submitted by the Northern Cheyenne tribe, we uplifted their request to have a dedicated docket to discuss the future of the Colstrip coal plant that would provide a more transparent, open, and inclusive space to discuss transition issues related to Colstrip. On this particular piece, our testimony builds on the direct initial request from the tribes by identifying a few specific issues that should be a part of this dedicated docket. It includes the fact that the company has not yet funded any of its estimated remediation, reclamation, and decommissioning obligations associated with its ownership of the Colstrip Generating Station, and we call on the commission to require that NorthWestern provide an update on its restoration activities, the latest estimate of these costs, including developing a plan to recover these costs in a timely manner and ensure that when this facility closes, there is adequate funding for remediation and decommissioning so that the local communities can both be protected from a health and well-being perspective and also participate and be part of any of the jobs and economic activity related to this. We specifically note that the docket should include space for different groups, including the Northern Cheyenne tribe and all other communities located in Rosewood County, to lay out their priorities for these types of remediation, decommissioning, and other reclamation activities to inform the company's plan. The third, building on the testimony of the joint parties in direct testimony, we support the consensus across many of the different groups to reject the company's proposal to allow it to recover environmental upgrade costs through the reliability compliance balancing account, finding that it does not provide adequate prudency review of whether or not investing in these environmental controls is the most prudent, least cost option for customers. Fourth, building on the testimony provided by Montana Consumer Council and Large Consumer Group, we request that the commission ensure retail customers are not overpaying the company for transmission and generation investments. Specifically, over the last 3 years, retail customers should have received around another $72 million in credits related to the wholesale revenues that NorthWestern collects and should have been passed on to customers. However, due to the company's revenue crediting methodology, this has resulted in retail customers not receiving the full credit of these revenues. We identify 3 vital changes to ensure that all of these credits do in fact flow to retail customers, which we estimate would cut the company's requested revenue requirement in this docket by another $15 million a year. And lastly, building on the record that we started with Roger Colton's testimony on energy affordability issues, we asked the commission to reject a number of proposals that were focused on shifting and increasing the costs borne by residential class customers related to generation, distribution, and customer service, and support the company's kind of current approach to allocating these costs. We find that the requests by the large customer groups are not grounded in an economic rationale and would only further exacerbate energy affordability issues in the company's territory. And with that kind of overview of both the broad testimony we submitted in direct, as well as our recommendations coming out of the cross-intervention testimony, I will turn it over to Michael to dig a little tiny bit deeper into his specific testimony on these issues.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And thanks for having me here. Yeah, so to dive into it, I'm going to kind of walk through the outline of what I covered in my testimony. As Amanda already mentioned, I think it was focused on 2 big issues, Colstrip, and then the rate treatment of Yellowstone County Generating Station. Next slide, please. And so basically, it starts out by doing the math and showing that NorthWestern has a large capacity surplus and does not need both Colstrip and Yellowstone County. And to the extent that after Colstrip retires, NorthWestern would have any capacity shortfall, I do the math and show that they could readily make up that shortfall by either some combination of extending their existing contracts that they have with both resources in Montana as well as regional capacity resources, building new resources in Montana, which are mostly wind, solar, and storage resources, as well as signing new capacity contracts with regional resources as NorthWestern has done in the past. I then kind of walk through the history of how we got to the point we are today, where Yellowstone County exists, and the flawed methods that, dating back to more than 5 years now, led NorthWestern to select that without real competition from renewable and storage resources that would have been far more economic. I then kind of debunk some of the claims that NorthWestern has made about the reliability of Colstrip and fossil generation generally by showing that their actual performance during recent, particularly severe weather events, extreme heat, extreme cold, has been pretty dismal. And then finally, just reviews kind of the reliability services that wind and solar resources can provide, as well as battery storage, in providing resource adequacy, flexibility, and other reliability services necessary to keep the grid reliable. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to kind of start with the math, my recommendations. So, basically, I think as Amanda kind of covered well, I recommend rejecting the Colstrip reliability compliance balancing account, and then also capping the NorthWestern's recovery of costs for the Yellowstone County at the cost of the resources they should have procured instead. So next slide. It kind of starts by going through this math of what's NorthWestern's capacity position. So in the first row, I take a number straight from NorthWestern, which they indicate is their current, at least when I file my testimony, their current capacity position. And you can see there are very large surpluses. The top table is summer capacity, winter, the bottom one is winter. And you see very large surpluses in the range of about 500 megawatts going out into the next decade. And then I kind of do Second one is just a minor adjustment to some of their math on how they credit hybrid resources. And then the third one is where I take Colstrip out. And this includes both their current Colstrip capacity as well as the capacity that they have announced plans to procure in the near future. And you can see that they do have a small capacity deficit once you take out all of that, both the existing and future Colstrip capacity. However, then in the fourth row, I then add back in existing capacity contracts that NorthWestern has with both Montana resources as well as regional capacity resources. And that goes a long way towards closing any capacity deficit that they would have without Colstrip. But that's just their existing contracts. And then, as I'm about to talk about, there is a large quantity of Montana resources that they could be developing and should be developing as a more economic source of energy and capacity than Colstrip. And then also I talk about the regional resources, other regional capacity contracts that they could be signing to improve their capacity position even further. And that quantity of resources, both Montana resources and the regional resources, is extremely large, and in many cases, I think would be more cost effective than Colstrip. So next slide, please. So for the Montana resources, and this I think is an exciting opportunity for the state of Montana to put to use its really excellent wind and solar resources, drive jobs, economic development in the state by using that resource to meet their own needs. Right now, a lot of that is being developed, but it's being exported to utilities elsewhere in the West who are wanting to tap into the state's excellent resources. And I think Montana ratepayers could also receive the same benefits if they if NorthWestern did so. And so this is really a massive quantity of resources that's available in the interconnection queue, which is basically the process by which a resource gets interconnected to the grid. You go in the queue, and it does take some time to move through that. But the key point about these projects, many of the projects I'm talking about here, are relatively advanced in the queue. So you can see that the total number is almost 12,000 megawatts. And just for reference, that's 6 times the peak load of the NorthWestern Balancing Authority. So this is really a large quantity of resources we're talking about that's trying to get onto the grid, and just I think reflects the quality of the wind and solar resources in Montana. So about 12,000 megawatts is the total amount in the queue. Most of that is trying to get on the grid in the relatively near term. Some of those are under construction. A lot of them, and this is really a remarkable number, that almost 2,500 megawatts have signed interconnection agreements, and that's the end of the interconnection queue. Once you have a signed interconnection agreement, you're basically are just looking for a purchaser for your power, and that's typically all you need to then get construction, go into construction, and then come online. And so these resources, I think, in many cases, could be very economically attractive and feasibly built in relatively short order. And then also there's over 5,000 megawatts of resources that have completed the facility study, which is the last stage of the queue, and they now have a pretty definitive number on how much it's going to cost to interconnect them to the grid. And so the conclusion here is that there's a lot of resources Montana and NorthWestern could and should be looking at if it really did want to economically increase its energy and its capacity needs. Next slide. There's also, I mentioned, the regional resources, and NorthWestern has historically heavily relied on these regional resources. Going back a couple of decades, it had almost no owned power plant capacity and was, almost entirely dependent on these, long-term contracts as well as spot market purchases. It's important to point out that what we're talking about here is these long-term contracts that give you capacity rights. It it counts towards your resource adequacy needs in the Western Resource Adequacy Program. And these are dependable resources that are just as dependable as if NorthWestern owned them, maybe even more so, and as I'll get to in a minute when I talk about the actual performance of some of the of Colstrip and other resources NorthWestern's own. So these are, when you have this long-term contract for a capacity resource, that's a really dependable, you have basically a firm agreement that it's going to show up when you need it. And so NorthWestern has used these. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that as they've been building out Yellowstone County and making other fossil acquisitions, they've been turning away offers that were quite attractive, financial economic offers for capacity that they received through the market and through bilateral negotiations. And they could have taken those, and I think should have, and that was part of the recommendation, that I think should determine how much they get paid for Yellowstone County, the things that they should have done instead. Northwestern does try to claim that there are physical limits on how much capacity they can import, and they try to portray it as if those are binding. I pulled the actual numbers from the Bonneville Power Administration's website, which is shown in the data here. For a few years, you can see that they've never, the physical transmission ties have never come close to their physical capacity. And so there's there's physical capability to bring in power from the Northwest into Montana if Northwestern wanted to go in that direction. And Northwestern also talks about that there had been concerns about the supply of capacity in the Northwest broadly. That was due to coal retirements and limits on the construction of new gas. A lot, I think, as folks have been paying attention, and just as a factual matter, EPA seems to be moving in a direction that will at least looks like it may take away some of those constraints, and that I think would address some of Northwestern's claims about the pending capacity supply in the region. Next slide, please. So how did we get Yellowstone County? So going back more than 5 years, Northwestern used this duration method, is what they call it, where they looked at the duration of peak load periods on their system, and then basically said, okay, we need a resource that can provide its continuous output for 20 hours. And that's a flawed method for two reasons. They looked at just demand alone, and it had 20-hour durations of high demand. But that ignores that renewable output was interrupting those periods of high demand, as well as imports. Again, the regional capacity resources, as well as energy market transactions, were addressing a lot of that need. And so you didn't really, when you look at your net load, your load minus your renewable output, you had a lot shorter duration needs. And so if they'd done the analysis correctly using a standard method like other utilities use, they would have seen that batteries combined with wind and solar resources would have met their duration needs. And they haven't even provided Northwestern commissioned its own analysis confirming that batteries provide this dependable capacity at a much higher rate than they accredited them when they were doing this selection process that led to Yellowstone County. So, and it wasn't just us pointing this out at the time. Other parties, including the Montana Commission, were pointing this out in these going back to the 2019 IRP. And unfortunately, I think Northwestern, if they paid attention to what we were saying, we may not have ended up with Yellowstone County, but here we are. Next slide. Colstrip is, in Northwestern statements, is held up as a key source of reliability and resource adequacy. If you look at performance across, really the last decade, it's consistently been unreliable during periods when it was really needed to perform. Here are a couple examples from the last year. The first on the left is a winter event. And this one was in the news quite a bit because it ended up being very expensive for Northwestern ratepayers, contributing to around $40 million in basically energy market purchases to replace the shortfall they were experiencing, in part because of this failure. You can see the demand is the green numbers, the green line there at the top, and then the blue and orange are the output of the two Colstrip units. And you can see during the extreme cold snap, the unit 4 was offline. It had a boiler tube leak going into the event, and they were trying to bring it back up, but it was missing in action for most of that first day when demand was really high. In July last year, so this is a little longer period, it's about 2 weeks there. You can see both units failed. One unit failed relatively early in the heat wave, and then as the heat persisted, the second unit failed. And so during that really peak period towards about 2/3 of the way across that right chart, those two really hot days, none of the Colstrip capacity both units were down when they were really needed for that peak event. So something to keep in mind when Northwestern is portraying this as an essential resource. Next slide. And that it's not just their availability on peak. Northwestern presents Colstrip and Yellowstone County for their ability to provide flexibility and other reliability services. And the reality is that particularly a combination of wind, solar, battery resources, as well as existing resources like hydropower, regional resources, all work together to provide those services just as well or better than conventional generators. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the technological advances in wind, solar, and batteries with inverter-based resources, they're digitally controlled, they're extremely fast, extremely flexible for both regulating frequency, regulating voltage, and finding these other services that are necessary to keep the grid stable. And so, I think all of the concerns that NorthWestern and other utilities attempt to portray, I think are outdated and don't reflect this reality that you're actually much better off. The capabilities of wind, solar storage are far greater and I think valuable than those of conventional resources on almost every metric. Anyway, so that's what I had. Happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amanda and Michael. As has been mentioned, this rate case has been an ongoing process with the original filing back in last July. There's been multiple rounds of testimony and cross-testimony, data requests, and the like. And we're approaching the hearing that'll happen beginning April 22nd. And then the Public Service Commission in the end will be making a decision. So we've been really grateful to have a great team of experts working on this with us. We're going to be turning next to our other set of speakers. We invited RMI to present a recent report that they put together that is very pertinent to the discussion going on in this rate case, looking at specifically the Colstrip plant and how that capacity could be replaced with other means. So I'll quickly introduce Becky and Christian. Becky Lee is a manager with RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute, which is an independent nonprofit that transforms global energy systems through market-driven solutions. At RMI, she works closely with regulators, utilities, advocates, and corporations to provide strategic advisory support and technical analysis related to utility transition planning. Her expertise lies in ratepayer costs and financial modeling to assess the impact of policy and financial levers, such as the Inflation Reduction Act or IRA, and helping stakeholders engage in regulatory venues to achieve reliable and affordable transitions. Becky holds a Master's of Public Policy and Energy Policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and an undergraduate degree in economics from Renmin University of China. And then Christian Fong is a senior associate with RMI. He strategizes and models how electricity providers can best leverage state and federal tax incentives and financial mechanisms to reduce costs and transition toward clean energy solutions. He also works on interconnection queue solutions that help deploy clean energy in a quick and most cost-effective manner. Christian holds an undergraduate degree in environmental economics and policy from the University of California, Berkeley. And before handing it off here, just wanted to let you all know I need to run to the Capitol, but Ann Hedges will be taking on emceeing for the rest of the event. But Becky and Christian, thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. And thanks for inviting us to be here. I'm Becky. As Nick mentioned, I'm the manager at RMI. I'm here with my colleague, Christian, and we're really glad to be here to talk about our analysis about the Colstrip plant. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a high-level overview of this analysis that we published earlier this year, and it was cited in one of the direct testimony that's written by the expert Robbins and was submitted into this rate case and support some of the recommendations that some of the other experts just talked about. So at a high level, we have a couple key components of this study about Colstrip. First, we did a financial analysis to assess the ratepayer savings if NorthWestern chooses to phase out Colstrip coal plant and reinvest in an alternative portfolio. So here we ran a specific analysis that I would say took a similar but slightly different angle than Michael just presented, but also shows similar argument that an alternative portfolio, particularly with wind, solar, and battery, can meet the same reliability, resource adequacy needs that Colstrip provides. And we then ran a financial and or ratepayer modeling analysis to show that these alternative resources can really create the savings opportunities for the Montana ratepayers. And here we particularly looked at some of the innovative financing mechanisms For example, securitization, which is the mechanism that is available in Montana, approved by the legislation, and can really effectively reduce the rate impact and reduce the potential near-term rate hikes that potentially will happen with the ratepayers. And with this analysis, we conclude that if NorthWestern chooses to phase out Colstrip and reinvest in this alternative portfolio, they will see significant up to billions of dollars of savings to the Montana ratepayers, both in the near term and also in the long term over the next several decades. And after that, we also ran some analysis to show the health impact and community impact from the Colstrip plant. And that helps strengthen and support the argument that this alternative portfolio can really bring some additional benefits to the local communities on top of the economic savings, financial savings that we already quantified in that financial analysis. And finally, we wrap up our study with some of the overview of the opportunities that we see for NorthWestern and for the Montana Commission if they really want to leverage the momentum and capture some of the benefits that we quantified in this study. So with that, I will hand over to my colleague Christian to give a little bit deeper dive into our study.
Thanks so much, Becky. So I want to give an overview of exactly what we did. So, the Colstrip coal plant has really been held on to NorthWestern because they're citing the need for reliable capacity value that the coal plant brings. And, as Michael alluded to his testimony, that's not always the case, and that clean energy can also provide those same benefits. So what we did is we developed an alternative clean energy portfolio that you'll see on the right-hand side that meets the same accredited capacity that the Colstrip plant provides. So specifically, we use the effective load carrying capability, the ELCC. And this is a measure of basically what percentage of time specific resources are available to provide electricity when the grid needs it the most. So during times of peak load and during potential shortfalls. And resources like wind and solar, which are variable and produce when the sun is shining, when the wind is blowing, have lower ELCCs than perhaps the coal plant. But the battery storage really does help firm up some of those resources because you can really shift the energy you need from the time of production to when demand is most high. And as Michael also alluded to, the Colstrip coal plant isn't a perfect capacity resource as well. There have been history of unforced outages that the coal plant has gone through, and coal plants across the country have failed during severe weather events, both in the winter and the summer. So what we did is we look at this alternative portfolio of lots of solar, lots of wind, and a bit of battery storage, and that overall, combined, really meet the same accredited capacity as Colstrip and provide that same capacity benefit that Colstrip provides. Next slide, please. And thank you. And what we find is this managed phase out of the Colstrip coal plant and reinvestment into the community with newer, lower cost resources could save Montana ratepayers at least $500 million and up to $1 billion if federal finance is fully leveraged. And so what we did here is we looked at a few different scenarios and a few different sensitivities, but the basic scenarios we looked at are what are the costs to Montana ratepayers if the Colstrip coal plant continues to operate? So what that means is continued reinvestment in pollution control and just operation and maintenance equipment into the coal plant, fuel costs and things like that. And we look at the lifetime of that plant. And then we also look at our alternative clean energy portfolio and look at the cost over time of that. And what we find is at a minimum, NorthWestern could save its ratepayers at least $500 million by reinvesting in lower cost clean energy resources that meet the same capacity accreditation that the coal plant does and makes it more affordable energy for ratepayers. You'll see here that we have some other scenarios that look at EIR. This is the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program. It is a low-cost federal financing program distributed through the Loan Programs Office. We find, really utilizing this low-cost financing can almost double the savings that ratepayers can see because the financing for these kind of new cleaner energy resources is so cheap. That being said, we have a new administration and it's a little unclear how they plan to utilize the EIR. But the new administration has also prioritized, making electricity rates really affordable and cutting electricity rates by 50%. And we find these financing tools a really valuable way to reduce electricity rates for Montanan customers. But even without that financing tool, even just using securitization, as Becky mentioned, which is a state-based financial tool, and using existing tax credits for renewable energy, we see that the new clean energy portfolio is still plenty cheaper than continuing to operate the Colstrip coal plant. Next slide, please. Furthermore, we estimate the health impacts of the coal plant, and just over the past decade, we estimate about $2 billion in adverse health impacts. This includes additional emergency room visits, tens of thousands of cases of asthma, and hundreds of premature deaths. So we really, view this reinvestment into Colstrip with clean energy as a win for both the local community in terms of health, and also a win for Montana as a whole in terms of reducing the cost of electricity. Next slide, please. So finally, if NorthWestern and the Montana PSC really want to explore these cost savings for ratepayers, we have a few suggestions. For the utility, NorthWestern, really engage with key stakeholders to leverage some of these policy and financial incentives and really make sure they're taking advantage of every opportunity they can to look at the broader impacts and really choose what's best for Montanans, both for their health and for their pocketbook. It's also important to really assess the impacts of a managed phase out and reinvestment. Actually, in the report we published, we linked to a case study we've written earlier about where we look at this coal plant in Minnesota called Sherco. It's about a 2 gigawatt coal plant that is retiring over the next 5 years. And what's happening there is the community isn't just being left without anything, because it's a very coal plant dependent community. Instead, what the local utility there is doing, Xcel, is they're partnering with the local city and the local county to create this economic development plan to attract new businesses and new industries, so that the local community can still be really financially and successful in the future without the coal plant. And so what they do is they're attracting new data centers, they're attracting new manufacturing jobs, and they're building a lot of renewables, both on-site and kind of a little further from the coal plant, to replace that energy and capacity value. And what we're going to see is a lot of that tax revenue filled in by the clean energy, by the data centers, by the manufacturing jobs. We're going to see lots of jobs created because they're bringing in that industry. Like some of those jobs will be on site, and some of those kind of industrial plants will be where the former coal plant was. And you're seeing renewable energy, including solar, wind, and storage, being able to connect a lot quicker to the grid because they're actually utilizing the same interconnection point as the retiring coal plants and leveraging that existing infrastructure. So we really see this as a really great case study for utilities across the country, and we think NorthWestern can do a similar thing. As for the Montana PSC, it's really important that they can emphasize the need for this thorough impact evaluation. As a regulator, you want to make sure you're assessing all of the options and really having all the information you need before you're making the decision that's going to impact all of these Montana households. And so what they can also do is direct the utility to incorporate alternative strategies like the EIR and securitization into its rate cases and IRP and its modeling to make sure that the regulators have the full suite of information they need and kind of can see all of the different possibilities available to them. And they can also look to precedents from other commissions. Both North and South Carolina commissions have really made it, made orders so that the utilities are ordered to kind of look at these alternative portfolios, look at these alternative financing solutions, making sure they're maximizing the value to their ratepayers. So I think that's all we have with the next slide. But I think Becky and I, as well as Michael and Amanda, would be happy to answer any questions from everything we have. Thank you.
Yeah, it looks like there's one question about the jobs, potential jobs, and the storage projects. I don't know if Christian want to elaborate. I don't know, we didn't touch on the job estimate for this one, but we do have the potential to do some of that analysis.
Yeah, Alex, it's a good question. I don't think we actually analyzed the specific job creation because I think it depends on what we're actually counting for it. Are we just counting the renewables we're including in our portfolio? Or as I mentioned with the Sherco example in Minnesota, there are a ton of other industrial jobs or other types of manufacturing jobs that could actually be brought onto the site if there's coordination between the utility and the local Colstrip community. So I think that job number is really dependent on exactly what they're looking for or kind of what jobs you're assuming. But as we see in Minnesota, you could really actually start to replace that tax base and that job that job kind of creation aspects with a wide diversity of industries. I don't have an answer on the battery storage project though. I don't know if Michael or Amanda, you do have something on that.
Yeah, for the battery, Beartooth battery, I think it was the commission did not approve it. And so it's not at the moment is not moving forward, is my understanding. That maybe there's a more recent update, but that was the last I heard.
Yeah, as far as I know, they've been looking for somebody to purchase the power from that project for quite a few years now, and haven't made any announcements about that actually happening. So I think that one is still on hold. I want to say thank you first off to our presenters. I thought that was fantastic, super helpful. We are going to put this up on our YouTube channel. We will put the slides up on our YouTube channel as well. So if anybody wants to go back and review this, you're welcome to do so. So thank you all very much for listening in, and especially to our experts who have put so many hours into helping decipher what they just presented. And going through the reams of paper that NorthWestern filed on its rate case. It is definitely a challenging task, so we really appreciate it. I would like, I see a question in the chat, which is, what is the cost of adding battery storage to a wind solar project? Is there a levelized cost number, dollars per megawatt hour? Michael, I assume that's you.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I mean, I think current numbers for battery storage are around, like for modules are like, putting this into, let's see, $100 a kilowatt hour. So that would be $100,000 a megawatt hour of storage. Right. But then, yeah, you have a slight cost savings if, and that's the module. Obviously, there's the balance of plant, which you can save a lot of that if you are putting it, at a wind or solar plant. But yeah, I mean, it's the markets are also in all kinds of fluctuations with the price of everything right now. So don't hold me to that number. That's just off the top of my head what I've seen.
I did put Lazard's levelized cost of energy into the chat on page 9. They have the unsubsidized cost both for just solar at utility scale by itself, as well as solar PV plus storage. Obviously, there is a range, and they have the same for wind and wind plus storage. Plus, on page 10, have a sensitivity that shows how some of these existing federal tax credits for wind and storage and solar and storage might affect the economics for developers as well.
Thank you. Katie recommends, and I think that's a good idea, raise your hand if you have questions. And I know that we have another 15 minutes, and I know our experts are happy to answer any questions. And Andrew, if you want to come off mute and just ask your question, that would be great. Otherwise, I can read it.
Yeah, does my mic work okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so there's kind of a couple questions that are embedded in here. I was starting to type a new one, but in North Carolina and elsewhere, utilities are using sort of worst case or inflated scenarios of increased demand because of AI and data centers as justification for building more gas. And you cited North Carolina as a model for NorthWestern to emulate, but they are approving a lot of big new gas plants. So are there any actual models where the public service commissions or PUCs are actually promoting renewables? And then I guess the second related question, are there any actual customers for opening data centers in Montana? Thanks.
Yeah, maybe I can take the first part. I'll probably let the other expert talk about the data center trends. On the North Carolina one, I think what we specifically proposed there for emulation was particularly around some of the EIR rules and expectation setting. because both NCUC and I believe South Carolina following up had some rules after their carbon plan discussion last year, requesting the utility to include some of their discussion and evaluation with third-party consultants in their upcoming analysis to make sure they fully evaluate the potential for federal legislation and federal policy incentives. And that particular kind of rule setting is something that we recommend for the PUC, of making sure you have a standard process for the utility to go through other alternatives before they going over and propose the gas proposal. So that's the particular pieces that we think would be good to follow, and not necessarily some of the other relevant decisions. Definitely agree with some of your assessment there, Andrew. I would say definitely there are other PUCs have examples that we can point to, and most recently, I would say following that similar thread of their thinking about making sure utilities are leveraging the federal incentives, like Washington UTC was a great example. I think they set some rules of making sure you also go through those policies and leveraging those incentives in the utilities RP review. And that is a potential advantage for them to encourage utilities to look at renewables, leveraging those financial incentives. And overall, I think there are definitely some utilities and PUCs, like in Minnesota in particular, like following some of the more of also RFP, the request for procurement, making sure you going through all of the other alternatives and making that a standard process before going to the gas as default. So yeah, happy to share more concrete examples, but I would say in terms of the general directions, kind of rule setting expectation, a setting around other alternatives before going to gas, it's something that we would recommend for the commission.
Amanda or Michael, do you have more to add to that? Thank you, Becky.
Highlight Xcel Energy and their kind of recent IRP, which really worked to leverage billions of dollars of some of these like inflation reduction, some of these like energy tax credits to support mainly renewable and storage and hybrid resources. And the other one that I would also point to, just in terms of showing that there is a way to accelerate clean energy and also move forward with the retirement of some of the oldest, most expensive fossil, would be DTE's kind of integrated resource plan from the end of 2023, where they agreed to kind of move up the retirement dates for its last few coal plants. So that'll be coal-free by the end of 2032, and accelerate the development of solar, wind, and storage. So that they're adding quite a bit more than they had expected. And add about 15,000 megawatts in total of wind and solar to Michigan. So those are just two that come to mind as well.
Thank you. And it looks like there's some more ideas in the chat as well, but I'm going to move from Christian. I'm going to move to Kayla Spalzer with the Daily Montanan.
Thank you for doing this webinar. One thing I was curious about, and it's probably in the docket somewhere, but is there a good summary of all of the dollars that NorthWestern Energy wants and for what, and then the portions that you had mentioned you don't think all of the request is needed, the portions that you think are not needed, and why?
I believe that can be put together. It is in their initial filing and in like their rebuttal testimony, as well as in the testimony of other intervening parties where there were things they wanted to change. I'm not sure it's all in one simple place, but we can we can kind of help point you to where those are in the testimony to make to help you kind of understand some of these figures.
Awesome, thanks.
I want to follow up. Thank you. And Kayla, do you have any more questions? I want to follow up on Andrew's question because it only got half answered.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. In Montana, there's been probably half a dozen bills that I've worked on this session regarding data centers. SABE Data Centers is the one that has been testifying. They don't appear to have any sites in Montana, and they do have sites in the Pacific Northwest. And there's been a lot of interest in getting data centers to locate in Montana. Although I'm hoping that one bill that we killed the other night stays dead. And that one would have allowed NorthWestern to acquire or to provide power to data centers without any PSC oversight. That bill died twice last week, and we're still keeping an eye on it. But there are, tax breaks for data centers. There are incentives to try to get them here. So we don't support those, but they're absolutely out there. So I would assume that there's more than just Sabi who is interested in moving to Montana. Adela.
Hi, everyone. This is Adela Honor. I'm here at the Northern Plains office in Billings. Thank you for all of your research and all the information you presented. My concern is, and I know that there are some places where you can't cross over from one side to the other, but my concern is that there's just an overwhelming amount of testimony to the PSC before and up through April 22nd. I know that all of this financial and kilowatt information has to be presented. Oh, by the way, I'm a member of not just Northern Plains, but MEIC and NRDC forever and ever. But we have to get to the PSC, and they have to know that a lot of their 400,000 customers are really upset. They're angry. They're pissed off, and I get all sorts of emails from all sorts of organizations telling me testify on this, testify on that. And there's usually a lot of detailed information, and frankly, it scares people off. And I mean, even as you all were talking, my eyes were glazing over. It's all important, but listening
Adela?
to that is one of the things that scares people off from testifying. They feel like they're not capable. They don't know enough. And somehow this has to be condensed into the very basics, like this is going to cost you a lot of extra money if it goes
Adela,
through.
can I interrupt because we're running out of time and I just want to answer your question. MEIC is an intervener in this case.
Yes,
we cannot ask
that.
people
So I
to
thought I saw
participate.
Molly Bell there. So
I would contact Northern Plains, Adela. Northern Plains has, they're, Northern Plains. They are an organizing outfit. I know they are following.
Yes, I know.
Closely.
That's why I'm here. That's what we're working on.
Okay,
but
great.
But
and we will work on getting you a fact.
Any other ability in other ways to connect with people so that they testify. That's the bottom line, and say no, enough. I already paid much for energy.
Adela, we can't talk about that. We can't ask people to go show up and say enough is enough. I would recommend you talk to Northern Plains about that. And I think the bottom line is always keep it simple, because this is about raising your rates. That's what this is about. So I'm going to try to answer a couple more questions or get in a couple more questions in before we're done. But if you have more questions, go ahead and reach out. Caitlin.
Hi. Wanted to just go back to some of the recommendations that were mentioned at the start of the presentation. So I'm curious kind of what's underneath that and what interveners think, to the extent you can discuss this, could be the best case scenario outcome in this rate case if you're defining best case scenario as the least affirmation for coal and gas and the best rate adjustment for customers. Thank you.
Yeah, I can maybe give a start on that. So I mean, with Yellowstone County, it's a little tricky because it's built and operating. And, obviously we would prefer not to be in this situation. And we've tried very hard over the last 5 years to avoid that from happening because it was not an economic resource. And that was clear at the time. But it exists and it's operating today. And so I think in that situation, what you want to make sure is that you're not rewarding NorthWestern for that bad investment. The whole point of, a regulated utility is that they should only make prudent investments. And they were told we and others, indicated at the time it was not a prudent investment. And so, that's why we proposed trying to cap the cost recovery for it at what NorthWestern should have done instead of building that plant. You don't want to, reward them for that bad decision. So that's Yellowstone County. On Colstrip, I think, there's been, RMI and a bunch of other people in this, on this webinar presented information that shows that, economically, and then, from my perspective, the reliability, and just the availability of resources, alternative resources, in-state renewables, regional resources, existing contract resources can be extended. All of that, I think, is a much more compelling economic and reliability case than continuing to invest in Colstrip, particularly given its, relatively poor performance during peak periods of demand. And so I think, what we're looking for there is that, NorthWestern not be given a blank check to continue investing in a plant, and they need to be seriously looking at alternatives. And, I think they would find, if they did that, they would find that they are more economic and more reliable.
Great. Larry?
Thank you. Hey, this is really about the data centers, and one's dealing with a rumor. I guess it's a rumor. I've seen it in print that NorthWestern may dedicate a big part of Colstrip to data centers, which by default sort of indicates that maybe their claims about how much we need it simply aren't true. And a second part of that I direct to you, Ann, is we've passed legislation, CPACE, that would allow data centers to provide their own energy, treat their own water, do all the things they need to do to be clean, and yet nobody seems to be promoting that. So where are we there?
Data centers, I mean, one bill that passed is trying to encourage, giving generators who locate next to a data center, give them a really huge tax break from 6% down to 0.9%. That's Katie Zolnikoff's bill. That bill is going to pass. We fended off some attempts to try to make that apply to Colstrip and existing coal plants. So, the idea is encourage these data centers to bring their own generation. And then an amendment was tacked on that bill in the House that said that they have to sell their excess power. When there's times of emergency, they have to sell it at cost to the utility. So it's really trying to couch in how data centers can behave if they do come to this state and want to get these special tax rates. I'm sorry, Larry, what didn't I answer in your question, which is probably the whole question?
Well, I think you did answer it, but I mean, we are promoting, if data centers want to come, we're promoting that they just provide their own power. And the second part of that is, I mean, the governor and NorthWestern Energy seem to be holding hands and making us believe the only way to have data centers come in is for NorthWest Energy to either, sell it from Colstrip, or worst case, if the Yellowstone County gets blessed, that's just an open door to build more methane generating plants. And the governor seems to be pointed toward that and almost totally ignoring the legislation that was passed on providing clean energy. And I find that kind of distressing.
The governor is 100% behind data centers. He wants more data centers, and so is the legislator from Colstrip. They see data centers and nuclear as their future. So I have concerns with both of those things. And there's a lot better way to go about business and providing Montanans with affordable energy than either one of those options. And data centers are very self-serving. And I don't want Montanans to be stuck in the situation of having to compete with Meta and Amazon and all the big boys for power. If that happens, I think we're all going to be in a world of hurt because we will lose. And residential customers are going to see changes in their rates that they're not going to like. So data centers are a huge concern. They're not just a concern in Montana. They are a concern all over the country. Kieran, and this is the last question I'm going to take. I'm going to try to put everybody's emails in the chat, or if Amanda, Michael, Becky, and Christian, if you want to throw your emails in the chat, if people want to follow up with you with questions afterwards, thank you so much. That would be great. Somebody already did. Katie's always ahead of me. Okay. Kieran.
I'll be quick here. I can't imagine any kind of energy reinvestment tax credits remaining with this administration for any more than today, so that they're gone. So has the grid, the analysis been done that you're promoting here without any of those energy tax credits? Because they're just today we know the new rule is coming that we're promoting coal. So those are gone. So how did the costs compare with them gone?
Kristen, you want to answer what it looks like with Montana law benefits?
Yeah. So we look at some Montana state laws like securitization. So that's a Montana law. It's been in the books. That's a state law. So that's still safe for that. In terms of the energy tax credits, we're living in a pretty uncertain world right now. It's a little, the news is changing week by week in terms of what's going to happen. What we do know right now is there are 21 Republicans in the House who have signed a letter basically saying, these tax credits are really important to our constituents, and we do not want to see them gutted in whatever tax bill they're going to write. So, will these tax credits be pared back at some point? Like, it's a possibility for sure, but we still see it as very unlikely that things will be wholesale repealed immediately. And, hopefully most of this will survive. So, if the time comes when these tax credits are repealed, we can look at that. But at the moment, things are still too uncertain to evaluate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's an enormous savings if we just rely on securitization alone. And that is a Montana law passed in 2019. We helped get that passed with Denise Hayman, who was a senator. We were thrilled that it passed, and we think it should be used. NorthWestern actually supported that bill in the second house. So it has, it had NorthWestern's stamp of approval at the time, and it just isn't interested, it doesn't seem, in using it. I want to thank everybody, our experts. Their contact information is in the chat. Reach out to us if you have any questions, or you don't grab their questions or their contact before we're done here. But look to our YouTube channel and you will find this presentation later today, first thing tomorrow, one of the two. We have to go read whatever's come out of the executive branch. We hear that there's a terrible executive order coming out on coal, particularly coal mining. We fully anticipate that they're going to do everything they can to, give coal huge breaks, especially coal exports, ironically. We love exporting coal. We don't seem to love everything else. But we're going to be looking at that closely. Fortunately, the presidential executive order should not be allowed to override our existing statutes and protections for water resources, for workers, and for people who happen to farm and ranch nearby. So we'll be looking closely at those and defending against them as they occur with all of our friends and allies. So stay tuned. And the rate case starts on the 22nd of April. Hope to see you there. It should be a fascinating time. And Amanda, when did you say our experts should be up? What's your time frame?
In
In the rate case.
In the rate case, I believe that we will crossed starting April 28th.
Okay. Great day to tune in if you want to hear more about our experts critiquing NorthWestern's proposal. So thank you all very much, and reach out to Northern Plains Resource Council if you are interested in being engaged. We just can't ask you to do so. So thank you all and have a great afternoon.